Hello everyone, Bill Giannone back again for part 9 of our 10-part series on time and materials invoicing. Today's category and topic is going to be your expected T&M margins. Let's start with normal profit margins on a commercial water loss as opposed to residential water loss. Residential water loss, if you're in non-program work doing a regular traditional residential water, you should expect that your profit margin should be at least 70% gross profit. That includes making sure we cover all of our labor expenses, all of the materials we're using, and any kind of additional direct costs like fuel costs, things like that. If we happen to use subcontractors, obviously that would be included as well. Any kind of things like a dumpster on site, we need to make sure we're adding those into our expenses. But let's just say, generally speaking, a 70% gross profit margin, or 70 cents on every dollar, is a reasonable amount of money to be making on residential. Okay. Generally speaking, gross margins on T&M invoices are slightly smaller than those on Xactimate. Here's the examples. Xactimate, we said 70%. If you're really functioning at a high level in your company and you've got guys who really know how to perform their jobs very, very well, you have a much better chance of getting closer to 80%. So let's call it 70 to 80% for a normal residential. Now, obviously, this is non-program work. For those of you who are doing TPA or program work, obviously your margins are lower for a couple of reasons. Number one, you have limitations on billing. You maybe can't use your own price list, or you're limited to the number of days that you're allowed to have equipment on site. And of course, you also have to pay a fee to that third-party administrator for the pleasure of doing business for them. So your rates will be lower than that. But let's just say this is normal. When we're talking about T&M on a complex commercial loss, the margins generally fall between the 50 to 60% gross margins. First question I always get is, why is that? A loss is a loss is a loss. We should be able to do it. Think of it in terms of this. We do a lot of residential work by self-performing it. We do our own work. We use our own staff. We use our own equipment and our own supplies. So the vast majority of our work is done within our own capabilities. On many large commercial projects, you have to remember a sizable portion of that could include outside labor, could include rented equipment, and most likely is going to include subcontractors, because the complexity of the loss means that it might be a little bit out of our wheelhouse and we might need others to come in and help us. If you remember back, we don't make a lot of money on our subcontractors or any kind of rented equipment. Most of the time when we have to do that, all we're entitled to do as the general contractor for that portion of the job is to add overhead and profit onto our invoice. So for their bills, we're adding a 20% markup, which results in about a 16% profit. So think about it. If you've got a project that requires a heck of a lot of subcontractors, you're only getting a 16% profit on that portion of your work. So even if you're functioning very well on the other portions up in that 70-75% ratio, you're still going to get knocked down just by virtue of that percentage being lower. Also remember that many, many times there are complexities to the job that don't allow us to do our job at its fullest and fastest. So there's no way for us to make a better profit by doing it faster or quicker than, let's just say, Xactimate. If Xactimate wants us to remove drywall at 100 square feet an hour and we can do it at 150 square feet an hour, we're obviously going to make more money. Well, that's not the case here, because no matter how long it takes, that's what we're billing. So we don't make extra money by working extra fast. Now, conversely, we don't make extra money by sitting around and doing nothing, because the adjusters and their experts are going to understand that we're not really working to the greatest of our capabilities. We need to make sure that we're working as hard as we can when we can, understanding that many times on commercial projects, there are nuances that we've discussed in the previous sessions that will slow us up. Things like residents in an assisted living building, the use of elevators or things like that. So let's just remember. People say, why use T&M if we know we're going to get lower margins because we have to clock it the way we do? It's real simple. Time and materials is the best way to capture all of your true work and expenses on this project. Using Xactimate, we're not going to be able to capture the fact that it might take us 15 minutes to get debris down the elevator because we have to wait and wait and wait for that elevator to be available for us to take our trash down. You never have to wait. When you're leaving a home, you walk right out the door, you throw it either in the dumpster or in your truck, and that's it. So the hours and hours that it could take in a high-rise hotel to get 3 or 4 stories of debris out can never be captured in an Xactimate line item. The only way to capture that is by keeping track of everybody's hours and documenting those difficulties. In the end, your invoice will be far greater than an Xactimate invoice for the same level of work because all those intricacies are not going to be captured. So you're going to understand that even though your margins may be lower, the dollars that you will bill on complex projects will be far larger than the dollars that Xactimate will be able to bill for that same amount of work. So just understand that. If you can only bill Xactimate out at about $100,000, even if it were operating at 70% profit, you would be able to only get 70,000 out of that. Well, if you're able to bill out in time and materials and that same job was 150,000 because of the complexities and intricacies, but now you lower that to 60% profit margin from 70% profit margin, you're talking about a far greater amount of money. Now you're up at around $90,000 of profit for that same work just because we documented and invoiced it in a way that accurately reflected our efforts. That's always the key words. Okay, thank you so much for joining us for part 9. When we get back to you next time, the final installment of our 10-part series on time and materials invoicing, we'll cover some final observations that we have to make sure that you are fully capable of hopping right in there and getting your feet wet with your next commercial project. I'm Bill Giannone on behalf of everybody at the Crest Network. I want to thank you so much for joining us today and continued success.